Welcome along to Top Shelf Tech. I am Jeremy Nees, and today we are lucky enough to have Nathan Howe from Zscaler joining us, otherwise known as New Zealand's favourite Aussie. Nathan, welcome along. Do you want to maybe just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Zscaler?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. I appreciate the reference to being the best Australian for New Zealand. That's a huge compliment, given how many good Aussies in New Zealand are across the pond there. Great to be here. So Nathan Howe is my name. I run innovation here at Zscaler. So that means that I get to play with all the cool new technology and figure out what's going to be happening over the next few years, both from a product point of view, but also a strategic point of view. By range of history, I've been at Zscaler for about 8 years now and have done a gamut of things. As you mentioned, Jeremy, I'm originally from Australia. I lived 20 plus years in Europe, or around 20 years in Europe, and now I've just moved to California. So the sunlight's good here for me here as well, even though I'm not actually in the Southern Hemisphere and enjoying the summer that you guys are getting.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us again. And I think, your comment there about you get to play with all the cool stuff. Good person to be friends with. I found that out earlier this year when I was over in Vegas for Zenith Live, and you rocked up to me with a Zero Trust SIM card and handed it to me and said, play with this. And that's kind of what we wanted to touch on today, and sort of just, I guess, taking 2 steps back. Zscaler, people get kind of fascinated with the forwarding. You've got client connectors, you've got tunnels, you've got these, branch connectors forwarding traffic to Zscaler. But effectively, if we can get traffic to Zscaler, Zscaler can process and we can do cool stuff with it. So we're talking about Zero Trust on the wire or wireless, and you guys have these SIM cards that are pretty interesting for Zero Trust deployments.
Yeah, and you kind of did a good job of actually summarizing everything it is. But the one thing I will call out is that, you know the tech pretty well. But the one thing I will call out is that you nailed it there, is that when we think about Zscaler, we're a really powerful control plane. I like to think of us like a really good obedient dog. You tell us what to do, and we'll do it really well. The problem is that we need to be able to get that traffic from various locations to Zscaler. And so we've done that historically in a couple of ways, whether it be just talking before we came on camera about pack files and things like that. Historically, some environments needed that, but we've gone through things like having client-side software. So we call that Zscaler Client Connector, and we have that on devices, whether it be your iOS or your Android, your Mac, your Windows, Linux, multiple other versions as well. But that only solved for the clients. And then we think about how we forward from the edge of networks. And so we started with tunnels, as you mentioned. So there were GRE and IPsec tunnels. So pretty good old fashioned perfunctory. This is how you forward stuff on. And then we evolved that into how we start getting more intelligent about things. So that's where we have our Zero Trust SD-WAN solutions. We have our the various versions in the cloud and the branch and data center. I said data, not data. Sorry, it's a data center. The Americans are getting to me. But the whole goal is to be able to get traffic to that control plane, and by doing that, then you can apply the policy that customers need. And that has been really good from an enterprise point of view. But as we all know, the enterprises have moved beyond just end users and desktops and servers, and there's a multitude of infrastructure out there, and that's ideally where kind of the whole SIM kind of initiative came from, was that we needed to get more traffic from more locations that were no longer within the 4 walls of our building. So if it's 4 walls, we could put a forwarding edge or a tunnel or a Zero Trust SD-WAN. Or if it was outside, we had the client-based software on a Mac or Windows or Linux or whatever it may be. And there are other things we need to get on. So those are those devices that were beyond those 4 walls or beyond a home Wi-Fi or wherever it may be. How do we provide connectivity for other devices? And ultimately, that's what it was. It's like, okay, let's go and figure out how to start getting stuff from other devices. And, you can see the multitude. And every day, I must say, we are kind of dumbfounded by the situations in where cellular connectivity is utilized. And it comes from, every industry has different things. And the one that I always come back to and laugh about, being Australian and given the Australian history that we have, is that when I got told about prisoner trackers, like ankle monitors on prisoners, and given Australia as a penal colony originally, a lot of my American and British colleagues like to make fun of me about it, but that's a legitimate thing.
We never talk about that. We never talk about that in New Zealand.
No, we antipathy and stick together and don't try to make fun of each other too much, I guess. just let's not talk about the rugby. Yeah, no, that's where it's really fascinating to see the use cases, and the goal was, as I said, was to bring more traffic to the Zero
Yeah.
Trust Exchange and to have our policies applied to our customers. What it's opened up is a multitude of really interesting use cases, and I guess you can say opportunities as well. So it's been really cool to actually just the last, say, 6 months of what we've been able to scratch off the top as an early access product.
Yeah, and your comment. There's a multitude of use cases here. I think is really important, and some things it's not necessary for. So a lot of people think Zscaler Zero Trust SIM, and they think about their phone. We've got clients for those. It's not for that. It's for devices you can't put clients on. But when we start thinking about IoT and OT, it's kind of a complementary play, right? Like, so you've told me before about Android scanners, and I think there's a good story that you've got there around spinning up warehouses really quickly. Maybe if you touch on that, that's not a use case for the SIM, but it just demonstrates how we can use a mix of capability.
Yeah, and actually, that's kind of one of the reasons we needed to look into a bit further is that customers are saying if they have a smartphone, one device, you rightfully say they can have Client Connector on there, and that covers a lot more. And by the way, in no way are we seeing the SIM as a competitive solution to our own Client Connector, because the SIM doesn't have the contextual information that a Client Connector would have. You have an identity of the user, you know that they're the posture of the device, you can see information because we have software running on the operating system to collect information, telemetry, other things that allow us to make decisions about policy in that granular zero trust motion. But in a situation where we had customers who wanted to roll out Android-based devices, and there are different types of Android. There's headless Android, and there's obviously Android with a head. And if it's one of these, it's an Android with a head. So you can actually run Client Connector very easily on that. And so we have a customer in Australia, it's a Japanese Australian customer, and it's a public reference, so I can mention them, Kubota, who actually has decided they don't no longer want to actually buy and build infrastructure for warehousing. They rent spaces now in metropolitan areas, and rather than deploying stacks of SD-WAN devices or boxes and firewalls, they just utilize their hand scanners, their Android-based hand scanners, with that Client Connector over at any 4G, 5G connection. And the whole idea is again, just simplicity. So they don't have to worry about complex infrastructure. They can deploy quickly. They can get business results extremely fast. That also became an impetus to us to think about what else do we need to do to drive into this innovation space of connectivity for other devices, not just those Android, Android's head with the headless versions. What about all the other stuff out there with the sensors? What about all the other infrastructure that is deployed? And honestly, just to point out some of the examples that we've been playing with and our customers that are working with us on right now is everything from mining devices deployed in the middle of an outback in Australia or in Europe, or giant pits, or we've got billboards or out of band systems, or things with could be sensors, could be drones, could be any sort of thing that we were seeing. And the use cases are kind of a bit astonishing. But the one thing I must add also, and this is kind of where the diversion, if you will, the fork in the road splits from a kind of traditional, we're connecting from a client connector, which was very much the client going out to something.
Yep.
And that's very much the case with Kubota. It's a client scanning, it's going out. What we realized very quickly with OT systems and IoT systems is that it's not just about outbound communication, it's also about secure inbound. And that in a lot of the cases and traditional IoT scenarios, when those devices are deployed, if they need inbound access, that device has to be on a routable network. And that is kind of where we get into that whole private APN conversation.
And that's problematic. Yeah, it's problematic to easily deploy, right? You're sitting behind CG nets if you're using a public network, and you know that ability to get back in. And these are devices that you can't necessarily put software on to establish some sort of outbound established tunnel. So you kind of end up very limited very quickly into your, sorry for cutting you off, but to your point, you end up with a private APN, don't you, or a 5G slice?
Yeah, and neither, there's nothing wrong with those. I mean, they're functional technologies, but if you look at the positives and negatives you get across those, and of course that you now have a routable network, so that device is on the mobile network, physical location, it could be something, and a great example with the customer is a sensor on the side of a rail or traffic lights. If an attacker was to physically grab that box, open it up, and take the SIM out and put it in their phone or their laptop, that phone or laptop is now on that routable network over that private APN or that 5G slice and inside the corporate network. And so it becomes that risk model again of where does the line of delimitation come into play? And so that's why when we built the zero trust SIM idea, and I need to step one layer up above from zero trust SIM. The zero trust SIM is one form factor, but there's another kind of key functionality, which we call our cellular edge, which is the kind of the magic gateway we have. And it's the service that sits for us between the SIMs and the rest of the world. It is the gateway that turns everything from the mobile into a zero trust policy engine play. And by that means, we can say traffic coming from those SIM devices going out goes through zero trust policy. So you can block YouTube or allow Salesforce, whatever it may be. But then also we've built it to be bidirectional. So if you want to come in, the relationship is no longer about the SIM having a relationship to the internal network. The SIM has a relationship to the Zscaler cell edge. And then everybody else has a relationship to the zero trust policy from Zscaler. And they just connect to the traditional zero trust policy. And that SIM itself becomes just another destination application. It simplifies things a lot, though.
Yeah. And look, in real terms, we're often with OT, IoT talking about privileged remote access here, right? So this is the ability to come into those using protocols like the SSH or Telnet. So it's not, as a lot of that, being able to connect back in or have control planes for your IoT networks, work backwards into that cellular network.
Exactly. And the idea really is to simplify. Like we mentioned with Client Connector, was just you could put that on a device and they'll have to worry about infrastructure. This is now, we're not saying don't worry about infrastructure. You still need to have a mobile network. And that's a very important piece I want to make a comment on. Because and actually, when you posted the original video after Zenith Live in early this year, we got some interesting feedback from some telcos, and they saw it as a competitive play.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, I'm not building a mobile network. I'm still leveraging their mobile networks. And so one of the key advantages of us is saying, well, that actually we're still using the mobile network. They're still getting paid, right? The telcos will still get paid for their network. But the fact is that we're actually just turning them into a secure path for us to go over the top of. And that's where we're working with some of the partners around the world, telcos around the world, to offer integrated solutions. But we've also built it so that it can be, and I'm not saying that this needs to be the case, but it can also fail from network to network or be utilized in different networks. And that's really advantageous in countries like Europe, around Europe. So in European countries where you easily cross borders, and you can, with us, we can easily roam from country to country, carrier to carrier. It's less of an issue in places like New Zealand or Australia, but it does give you that freedom and that resilience as well. And okay, in the worst case scenario where, and I don't hope this doesn't happen, where a telco stops working, then we can also, because we're not stuck with one provider being the core, we can also fail others. But that being said, we can also deliver it integrated with the telco. So we've built it so that it's dynamic. It really comes down to what ultimately the customer wants. We built technology to make it simplified for the customers to deploy and use, but ultimately it's about their use cases. And that's where, we could go a million ways and say that, we don't want to work with telcos, but that'd be silly. It's their network. Of course we want to work with them. That's the whole idea. So we are partners with telcos to deliver this, but we also realized that our customers needed to be a bit more dynamic and resilient than just, one network plane.
Which is, what we've seen with SD-WAN, right? Like SD-WAN hasn't displaced telcos. It's actually just allowed people to use multiple telcos and use the best connections available to them. And
Correct.
I think, very similarly with this, technology, if we're thinking about in New Zealand and you want to go set up a mobile network for IoT or OT, and you go, and you're going to go down the path of getting a 5G slice. You got 3 different networks first that you possibly will need to get, that infrastructure set up from at least a couple of them to make sure you've got good coverage, and to your point, some resilience as well to potentially fail over. But then, you are maybe talking about dual SIM solutions. So you very quickly actually limit the potential and for your, and the viability, I guess, of deploying one of these solutions where, with the Zscaler Zero Trust SIM, you have access to all those networks without having to go, spend the money, spend the time establishing 5G slices, 4G APNs, things that take time and are expensive. And if you're thinking about that, then doing it, on a less regional, more global basis, that's a lot of work. And I think right around, you'd start to see a lot of business cases tip over. So it actually, I think, enables the business case to use those telco networks.
Absolutely. And I think that's where we're seeing the real benefits with our telco partners. And we're working with a couple already, actually in New Zealand specifically around this, is how to make that as an offering that is integrated into their services. So it's not just a kind of we're over the top as the telco terminology is. We're actually integrating. And that's important because there are customers who require that. And yes, like just like SD-WAN is there's one link, there's two links, there's three links, and the customer's going to pay for that because they want resiliency. And that's what we see it as well. So yeah, it's in no way an attack on any of the telcos. We actually thoroughly respect everything they're doing. They've enabled Zscaler to do a lot of very interesting things with client-based software or network-based software. But now we're just extending it to be able to connect more of those devices from over those mobile networks into the zero trust exchange, which gives our customers, to your point, that simplicity of deployment. They have one place to manage policy, one place to control, one place to build policy and manage their end users, their IoT, their OT, their workloads, rather than having to have a multitude of infrastructures.
And I think it's important to note as well that, mobile is another form. And if we're talking about Zscaler on the wire, we are seeing this, explosion of satellite technology as well. Starlink's been revolutionary. I use it at home. It's fantastic. We've seen, some big announcements from Amazon about Cupia and what that project's going to deliver. So, we were able to reach places cost effectively with, stable, reliable communications that we couldn't in the past. Which, if we're thinking about things like a fishing vessel, heads offshore, maybe has cameras on board, has a whole lot of stuff on board that's useful to stay connected, and you very quickly go out of range of your mobile networks. In particular, when we start moving into stuff like 5G from sort of where we were years ago with 3G and even prior to that. So yeah, it's about expanding those use cases really.
Oh, absolutely. I think to that point on satellite, I wouldn't look at satellite as being from let me think back one step. Satellite is actually revolutionary in the way in which we're doing high-speed communications over it. It's fantastic to see. Like yourself, I grew up in a very isolated part of the world with very little interconnection for a very long time. It's good to see that people are able to be serviced now in ways that we could never be done before. I think that's amazing. But ultimately, if you look at it, the satellites are a connection plane that allows for communication to go over the top. That's the idea. Well, Zscaler is a secure mechanism to go over the top of various networks. And the example I was coming through, if you look at just even stepping away from SIMs or anything else, client connector on a device, like my phone, when it runs client connector, I'm on the Wi-Fi, it's on the Wi-Fi, it's connected. If I go outside, it's on 4G or 5G. If I go home, it's on Wi-Fi, it automatically finds, and very much like an SD-WAN box, it's finding the best path to connect to. And arguably, and this is a modern phone, so theoretically, I could also start utilizing Starlink as well. So it's just another mechanism to move packets. The question is then, how do we secure those packets? And that's where, from a satellite point of view, we look at it very similarly. We actually already have quite a few customers already deployed with Starlink and other low Earth orbit solutions, where they're utilizing as a secondary or tertiary backup link for their primary. And all it is just when those links go down, it then fails over and does the overlay over the top of that network to just connect. The cool thing is, with the technology we've built here for the cellular world, this cell edge that we've built, is it's software. So very much like Zscaler, everything in Zscaler is software. Yes, we have a bunch of places that we put hops. We have, we pipe it, we power it, we offer an SLA, but ultimately it's software, and we can move that software where we need to. And so, thinking in along those lines, there's no reason why we can't very easily extend over satellites, and we are already doing that. So it's just a matter of thinking through the communications flow, the underlying, like if you want to say layers 1 and 2, maybe 3, then we become the overlay on top of that. That works pretty well. But there's a lot of opportunity to start doing things even locally. And one of the big opportunities I see actually is a combination of both cellular and satellite. And that's in places like in the middle of the Australian outback, or in the middle of the desert, wherever it may be, where there is just no cellular provider, just not possible. So that you can provide your own private network. You can deliver a network kind of in a box. And then you have downstream connectivity, 5G, and you can do all the things you need there, and then you backhaul it up over satellite.
So combining private 5G there to connect your edge devices, and then into satellite for the backhaul.
Correct. Absolutely. And that's something that we've been working with a couple of our customers on already. So it's in where Zscaler becomes the secure overlay path, but actually built into the edge where the private 5G ecosystem is. So yeah, it's again, just putting us in the right place at the right time to achieve the right controls. Cell edge is one of those, and there's the extension of that in there, other areas as well. So it becomes quite fun to see how our customers in their different use cases day to day want to deliver the connectivity, and connectivity is one part of it, don't get me wrong. But more importantly is ensuring the integrity and security and resiliency of those communications. And that we play a good part in that, because of we look at ourselves as not just as a control plane, but as a optimization plane, a security plane, and the ability to deliver all those to our customers is key.
Yeah, and you know that I think just that piece around private 5G as well up at Zenith Live. There are actually a number of vendors there that were had private 5G solutions that were integrated with Zscaler. And the thing that struck me is just how quickly that technology is moving from very expensive, complex
Mm.
to deploy, actually
Yeah.
big physical footprints to shrinking and becoming commoditized. And so I think, you know,
Yeah.
that kind of ability to reach the edge and reach all sorts of devices on the edge that actually even Wi-Fi networks haven't been that fantastic for, you know, with density in factories and challenges like that. You are kind of getting to this point that you can go, you know, if we started with Zscaler and thinking about protecting corporate devices, we're starting to go, actually, there's all these supporting bits and pieces that come together, and we can actually do a lot
Yeah.
more with it and think of it as a complete, you know, kind of complete solution and complete posture across our business.
Agreed. And we do see that and again, the challenge with 5G in general has been its cost to entry point. I think that's changing slowly but
Mm.
surely, especially in the private 5G environments. But I think also the biggest and the hardest lift has been the fact that we need to replace a lot of those antennas, the dongles, the services, the connected models, because most environments are still either Wi-Fi or Ethernet, or in some cases maybe private LTE. But to get them on a private 5G, you literally have to replace infrastructure, and that becomes I think the hardest part. But that is changing, and we are working with a few partners on that one actually to help drive that. So there is a lot that can be done to enable enterprises. But again, I step back into the idea of like, well, it's all well and good to have Wi-Fi, Ethernet, SD-WAN, whatever it may be. But the simple for me, and this may be a little bit selfish given I work for the company, but I look at it as like, well, we become the great unifier. Like obviously, we'll go over the top of and integrate with any of those network providers, network solutions. We provide the end to end of the the initiating connection service, whether it be on a SIM or a client connector, or whether it be zero trust SD-WAN or cloud environment. And all that forwards across those ecosystems to our control plane. Now, the control plane doesn't have to be, as one of our 160 plus locations. It could be either locations that you run in a 5G MEC as well. You could actually virtualize our stack and move it into a 5G MEC, which again, some of our customers are doing. It's just a matter of we unify a lot of that simplicity, a lot of that control for the end user IoT OT workload environment, and even now heading towards B2B, which is another conversation we don't have time for. But there's that in itself is unifying those things. Again, it's simplification. And that's the goal, is to make it as simple as you need to get traffic moving to our customer policies. Full stop.
Fantastic. Hey, Nathan, thanks a lot for joining us and giving us a really good run through of the, and not just the Zero Trust SIM, but I guess the broader philosophy around, getting Zscaler out to the edge, out to some more, expanding the use cases. Anything you sort of want to leave us with today? Any last thoughts? Anything that, any teasers about what might be coming next? I'll throw it to you and then we'll wrap.
Yeah, good question. There's a lot. I think the one thing that I always talk about with my customers is very simply, we look at our innovations in kind of 4 areas. One is, how do we get stuff? Like, what is it? Like, and there's the SIMs are a good example of that, or the Zero Trust SD-WAN is another good example of how we get more traffic. That's one thing. The second part is the core engine. So how do we deal with the traffic? How do we apply the controls? How do we apply the right policies and move traffic the way it should go? The third engine is how do we send stuff out? And all too often, our customers tend to think of us as just kind of an egress gateway, just drop out the edge. And I would argue that many of you should start rethinking about that and thinking about how you can leverage the intelligence of the platform to start sending the traffic down the path that you would like. Don't just dump it out to the internet. Think about being specific, and you can utilize that to drop things out of a certain country, out of a certain IP. This is a very important thing for a lot of applications, but not thinking about it more advantageously about where you want things to come out of. That's another thing as well. And the fourth engine is our intelligence engine. And that's where, how do we get intelligent about all the things we've just done, the decisions we make, the insights we make, the policies we've blocked, the security controls have been applied, all these things play in the intelligence. And so for us, all of those things are the 4, simplifies the 4 areas of innovation. And you'll see a lot more coming in those spaces. But my point to everybody listening is, if there's something that needs to be added, we're open to that. We get our greatest innovations from our customers. They're the ones who challenge us and say, hey, can we do this? And we've done it quite a few times with the likes of Siemens and others. So we'd be very happy to go and spend more time with the customers on very cool ideas. So I'm willing and open to hear from anyone about some very cool ideas to start leveraging our technology towards. That just brings us in more innovation and helps me build a better path for the next 5-10 years. So that'll be my parting shot anyway, is to say always be open to us and challenge us, because we're willing to hear from you about those problems and challenges.
Awesome. Well, look, thanks again for joining us, Nathan. Really appreciate you taking the time. Great to just get that deeper dive and a bit more of a understanding around where you're heading with the Zero Trust SIM and broader platform.
Thanks, Jeremy. Always good to see you, mate.
Cheers. Thank you.